You think you can walk around like you own this city?" The officer's voice was laced with venom as he towered over the older woman standing frozen in the middle of Harmony Square. The mid-morning sun did nothing to warm the tension crackling in the air. A small crowd had begun to gather, their murmurs growing louder as the scene unfolded. "I didn't do anything wrong," the woman said, her voice calm but trembling. She clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles whitening as the officer stepped closer. His badge gleamed, a symbol of authority turned weapon under the weight of his hatred. "Don't lie to me," he barked. "You people are all the same, sneaking around, stealing, causing trouble." Her eyes widened in shock, but she didn't back down. "I was just walking to the store, that's all." The officer smirked, a cruel satisfaction flickering across his face. "Sure, just walking. Then tell me why you were lingering around the bank, scoping it out maybe." The woman shook her head vehemently. "No, I wasn't. I never even stepped inside." The crowd, growing braver, began to voice their discontent. "This isn't right," someone shouted. Another added, "Leave her alone." But the officer ignored them, his focus laser-sharp on the woman. "Empty your bag," he ordered, the words cutting through the rising noise like a blade. She hesitated, and his face darkened. "I said empty it, or maybe I'll do it for you." Her hand shook as she opened her purse, pulling out a book, her wallet, and a small container of glass beads she used for her craftwork. The officer's eyes locked onto the beads. "What's this?" he sneered, holding up the container. "Planning to use these to break into something?" Her heart raced as she tried to explain. "They're for jewelry. I sell handmade pieces to support myself." The officer's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Sure, let's see how they taste then. Go on, eat it." Her breath hitched. "What? You heard me," he said, stepping even closer, his voice dropping low, threatening. "Unless you want me to take you downtown for trespassing and resisting arrest." The murmurs of the crowd turned to gasps of disbelief. "This is insane," someone yelled. But the officer's authority kept them at bay, fear flickering in their eyes. The woman stood rooted to the spot, humiliation and fury warring within her. The beads in his hand caught the sunlight, sparkling like shards of ice. "You can't make me do that," she whispered. "Watch me," the officer shot back, his tone daring her to defy him. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, a commanding voice sliced through the chaos. "What's going on here?" Heads turned as a man strode into the square, his tailored suit and air of authority silencing the crowd. The officer's smug expression faltered, replaced by confusion and something resembling panic. The man's sharp gaze landed on the woman, and the beads clutched in the officer's hand. His jaw tightened. "Explain, now." The officer hesitated, his bravado faltering. She was acting suspiciously near the bank," he stammered. "I was questioning her. By forcing her to eat glass." The man's voice was icy, his fury barely contained. He stepped closer, his presence commanding. "Do you even know who she is?" The officer's eyes darted around, foundering nervously, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. The crowd watched, breathless, as the truth began to unravel. But it was clear this wasn't just about the woman's dignity or the officer's abuse of power. Something much larger was at stake. The man's expression darkened further. "You've made a grave mistake, and I assure you, the consequences will be swift." The officer's face paled, and the crowd leaned in, hungry for what would come next. What was this man's connection to the woman, and how would he exact justice for the humiliation she had endured? The square held its collective breath. The man stepped closer to the officer, his gaze unwavering. "That woman," he said, his voice measured but filled with an unrelenting authority, "is my mother." The words sent a shockwave through the crowd. Whispers turned to exclamations as the crowd pieced together the connection between the man and the woman. Ruth Coleman, a local artisan known for her handmade jewelry, had raised her son Daniel Coleman in this town. And Daniel, now a respected judge in Harmony County, was not a man to be crossed. The officer's confidence crumbled as the realization hit him. Daniel turned to his mother, his voice softening. "Are you all right, Mom?" Ruth nodded slowly, though her hands still trembled. "I'm fine now." Daniel turned back to the officer, his expression hardening. "Officer Harding, you have overstepped your bounds in a way that will not be ignored." Harding opened his mouth to respond, but Daniel cut him off. "Save your excuses. I'll be taking this matter directly to the chief, and I'll ensure a full investigation is launched into your conduct." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the square. Harding's face flushed with anger and humiliation, but he said nothing. As Daniel led his mother away from the scene, Ruth couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation was far from over. Harding's silence wasn't submission, it was a storm brewing just beneath the surface. Something told her that the reckoning that had begun in the square was only the beginning of a much larger fight, one that would test not only her family's strength, but also the soul of their community. In the days that followed, the incident in Harmony Square became the talk of the town. Daniel wasted no time filing a formal complaint against Officer Harding, and the case quickly gained attention. Witnesses from the square came forward to provide statements, each one painting a damning picture of Harding's actions. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just about one rogue officer. The complaint unearthed a pattern of abuse within the Harmony Police Department, with Harding at the center of numerous allegations of misconduct. Chief Monroe, the head of the department, found himself in a difficult position. The evidence against Harding was overwhelming, and public pressure was mounting. At the same time, Daniel and Ruth became the faces of a growing movement for justice and accountability. Town hall meetings were held, protests organized, and stories of injustice shared. The community rallied behind the Colemans, their voices rising in a collective demand for change. For Harding, the walls were closing in. Stripped of his badge and facing criminal charges, he retreated into a bitter silence. But the trial that followed wasn't just about his actions. It was a reckoning for the entire system that had allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. Witness after witness took the stand, their testimonies revealing a culture of corruption and prejudice that ran deep within the department. Throughout the trial, Ruth sat in the front row, her presence a quiet but powerful reminder of the strength and resilience of those who refused to be silenced. Daniel, serving as a key advocate for reform, balanced his duties as a judge with his role as a son determined to see justice served. And as the verdict was read, finding Harding guilty on multiple counts, the courtroom erupted in a mix of cheers and tears. The fight didn't end there. For Daniel and Ruth, the trial was just the beginning. They knew that true change would require more than holding one man accountable. It would require dismantling the systems of power that had allowed injustice to flourish and rebuilding them with fairness and integrity at their core. Together with their community, they vowed to continue the fight, knowing that the road ahead would be long and challenging, but also filled with hope. As Ruth and Daniel stood on the steps of the courthouse, looking out at the crowd that had gathered in support, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. Harmony was changing, and so were the people within it. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, the future looked bright.